Hey guys, welcome to the PassionFruit podcast. Today we're discussing privilege, as you can tell by the handy dandy title. So we cover all sorts of topics like white privilege. We even talk a little bit about black privilege. We touch base on that. Male privilege, institutionalized racism, education, all of these sort of topics sort of intertwine into each other. I try to give as many examples of different types of privileges that there are in the world, and we have a conversation about it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's something that I feel like should be talked about more. So this is my take. Privilege. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, or wherever or whatever time you're watching this. So this is my third time trying to film this episode. I hope it's a good one and it goes over well. Kept getting interrupted the other two times. Well, the first time I tried to film it at like 11 p.m. and I was exhausted because I've been getting no sleep recently, or like the last week of school, I was getting no sleep because I was like working, trying to finish my projects and up all night. And now that I'm out of school, like I have to try to get my sleeping schedule back to what it was earlier in the school year. So I'm not like exhausted the whole day. Anyways, my own personal problems. So I'm trying this new sort of method with the podcast, and I'm going to see how it works. It's like, I like it when people in podcasts kind of make it seem like a chill, sort of like talking to your girlfriends or talking to your friends sort of environment, where you talk about, the serious stuff and you talk about, the topic, but at the same time, still really casual, and it's just kind of like a chill environment thing. I don't know, I tried this in the previous episode, when I talked about failure. Literally the podcast I don't think started till like 15 minutes in. We'll see how this ends up going. I don't know. I kind of liked that. That podcast episode was also very unscripted. So usually I have like notes. Well, for the other ones I had notes, and this one I kind of don't have notes. I basically wrote down the main points I wanted to cover, but other than that, there's no like real notes. Last time I literally didn't have any notes. I just sort of talked. But, yeah. Anyways, no one cares. No one cares about this. But something I did want to share with you guys. I started a new podcast, and it's really good. It's called the Side Note Podcast. It's by a YouTube channel called ASAP Science. And it's like science, but like science you actually care about. So it's not like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Like they actually make science videos on like relevant topics and things that people actually are interested in knowing. So there was this episode that was like, this is a podcast episode where they were talking about video games, if they're really like a violent, harmful thing for kids and for people to consume, or if they're like an actual useful hobby. They did another one about marijuana, like is it harmful or is it actually like a creative substance? That was an interesting one. That was their first podcast. And they just have a lot of cool stuff. So if you want a new podcast, listen to the Side Note Podcast by ASAP Science. Really good. Or if you don't want to listen to the podcast, watch their YouTube videos because they're really good. About to say not sponsored, but like why would I be sponsored by these two randoms? Anyways, they're really good though. You should totally check them out. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about privilege. Oh my god. If you can hear stuff, families downstairs, ignore that, please. But it's something that's really prevalent in my life, and I just really like wanted to talk about it because I felt like I had a lot of examples and different things that I've been learning about privilege that I wanted to share. So yeah, that's what we're talking about today. And I think one of the first things that when you think about privilege, a a lot of times people think privilege and associate that with white people or white privilege. And that's probably one of the more, generic ways to think about privilege, or the one of the more widespread ways to think about it. And not to say that white privilege doesn't exist. That's actually something I wanted to sort of discuss, is that a lot of people don't even know at first what privilege means. They just kind of associate it with like the dominant race, or which in America, white people, and they don't really think about what privilege actually means. So to break it down, privilege has two definitions. So privilege can mean, number one, having an advantage over someone else or another group of people. That's the widely known one. But number two, the one people don't think about as often, is privilege also means to have an honor. Like, it's my privilege to do this, or it's my honor to do this favor for you. And we're going to kind of talk about both. But first, I want to talk about the first definition, the widely known one, is having an advantage over someone else. And I sort of wanted to start by talking about a book that I've been reading recently. I just started this book like a couple days ago. I'm only like 60 pages in or so I barely have made a dent. But it's really good, and I think I do want to talk about it more when I actually finish the book. It's called The Hate You Give. U is just the letter U, and it's written by Angie Thomas, and it's a book about a 16-year-old girl named Star, who kind of lives in the projects, to say the least, and her best friend gets killed by a white policeman. And the whole book, I haven't read the whole book, but I know for a fact one of the themes is privilege. Obviously, there's other themes too, but Star, she's, a black girl. She grew up in the projects, but she goes to this, white school, this Williamson prep school with, a lot of white people and just more privileged people. And her best friend gets killed by the police, who's black, and it's a lot about police brutality. It's about, finding justice for this dude that got killed, and just privilege in general. I can't really speak for the whole book because I haven't read it, obviously, yet. I'm reading it now, but I haven't finished it. But privilege is one of those, topics, or one of those themes that you see really prevalent in the first couple of chapters. It's one of those things where these types of shootings and these types of, unfortunately, this type of, racism and happens all the time. And it's not always on the news, and they're not always leading headlines. It kind of reminds me of the March for Our Lives movement. What was it? The march in D.C., Washington, D.C., when Naomi Wadler, the 11-year-old little black girl who spoke there at the rally, or whatever you would call it, the march, saying that she speaks on behalf of all the black girls and black men that get shot in their in their environments and in their homes every day, but they're nothing. They're not even, a headline on the news. But, these types of shootings happen every day. And that whole March for Our Lives thing did also spark, a little sub-debate, not only just about gun violence and, mental health, but also about how black kids and just underprivileged kids, that those shootings are kind of their reality and they're not headlined. But when it becomes to be a massive school shooting, that's when shootings get publicity. And I heard that definitely as a side, another conversation that, sparked from the movement. And that's one of the things I really love about movements, is they just spark conversation, because I can see all different sides of these conversations, but they're important to conversations to be had, and it's just good to be having these conversations. But anyways, that sort of dialogue, I guess, sort of reminded me of the book I'm reading, The Hate U Give, and how white privilege in that sense can be very prominent. Obviously not all schools are white, but when it comes down to it, a lot of the times, sorry if you can hear my family downstairs, but a lot of the times it comes down to when something happens to a dominant race, it's headlined, but when something is not, if something is, happens with the minority race, it's not looked on as important. Or when a black man shoots, or just a black person shoots another black person, they get, sentenced years in prison. But then when a white cop shoots a black man, he gets paid leave. And there's just a lot of just privilege and stigma around that. Also, speaking about privilege when it comes to prison, a little while ago, like a couple months ago, I watched Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th. It's about like the 13th Amendment and how, which freed slaves in the United States. But it also talks about it sparks conversation about the prison system, how like in slavery, the black population in prison was 0, but then after slavery, blacks make up like more population in prison than they do in the United States, and talks about sort of racism in that sense. Not to say that there's no criminals who are black that, should be locked up, but it gives you a conversation of how can there possibly be that many black people who are prisoners now when there weren't any when you needed us, for slavery. So, just a lot of conversation about that sort of privilege in that sense, white privilege in particular. One of the more common, I guess, rebuttals people, usually majority race white people in America, use against this, and even, anyone can honestly say this, but a lot of times people try to rebuttal white privilege with the idea that black people are always trying to play the victim, or as if black people just tend to be criminals more often than white people. And to that I say, honestly, it all comes down to education, what you teach your kids, what you teach your children, what you teach society. And I'll get into that a little bit later about privilege when it comes to education, which ends up, resulting in these behaviors. But going back to the two examples I said earlier about prison and just racism in general with the police and everyone, it's something that's very real, and you see it, you see that conversation all the time. And these are just, a couple examples I listed of how, we see white privilege prevalent today. And once again, not to say that, all black people are innocent, but I'm also not to say that not all black people locked up are necessarily guilty. That's my point here. But, white privilege we see prevalent in the prison system and just racism, interactions with the cops. We've been seeing a lot recently with social media. And not to say that these things had never happened before, we just have a way to share it now, which is why it's becoming more and more of a talked about conversation. Going off of what I said earlier, when a lot of times majority race or just people in general will try to, rebuttal white privilege with the idea that black people are always trying to play the victim and things like that. And when I hear that, I honestly feel like you're avoiding the real issue. Like, these types of things have always been going on. It's just, as I said earlier, we now have a platform. And, we're not going to make our voices be silenced. Yara Shahidi, she's an actress. She's on Blackish, which is on ABC. And also Grownish now. Her Twitter, banner thing once had a quote that said, when our brothers and sisters, lives get taken and there is no responsibility, that will continue to fuel the movement. speaking about the Black Lives Matter movement, which has now become really prevalent in the news and just in media in general, standing up for, finding justice for Black people in America who, were constantly being treated in, being not right. And there's constantly, racism against us. Another remark I've actually heard someone say to me, because once I was talking about racism in America, and I was talking about how racism is institutionalized. We can't really talk about the bigger issue of racism without talking about where it started. This country, the United States of America, was built off of racism. It was built off of slavery and free labor, per se. Or forced labor, not even free, forced. It was both free and forced. I bring up slavery as a beginning when I talk about racism, and someone told me once that people tend to bring up slavery as an excuse for what's happening in the present today. And when I heard that statement at first, it kind of shocked me, because I was like, how are you going to tell me? Because to me, it just seems clear that problems don't just appear out of nowhere. Like, how I see it is that there's always a reason for the way people think. There's always a reason for the way people are, the way the country is, the way things are, the way the world is. And we sometimes have to look at the start to see where we are now. But something I've noticed a lot of the times is with, and this was a white dude saying this to me, but people tend to bring slavery as an excuse, when I really think it's the starting point. You can't really talk about racism in this country without talking about how our country is, it was built on racism. Racism is institutionalized. Going back to the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the speakers from the Parkland shooting in Florida, I want to say it's Florida, was saying, it was one of this promo videos, I guess, for the march that came out, right before the march, and I really wish I would have gone. I didn't, but I could have gone. Anyways, but I saw this thing on social media where one of the girls from the Parkland shooting was like, when we talk about gun violence and we talk about shootings in America, we also need to talk about institutionalized racism that still goes on today. Once again, with the cops, you see a black man, and you automatically associate it with something illegal or bad, to say the least. Also, if you want to talk about institutionalized racism, how is it that the poorer the poorer community is, the darker their skin tends to be? And that goes for literally any country in the world, whether you're black or not. I know in some Asian countries, the darker your skin is, symbolize that you were working in the fields, and that if you're working out in the fields, that meant that you were poor. And so a lot of times in, some Asian countries, they glorify, white skin because of that reason. And that goes just for any place in the world. Like, why is it that the poorer you are, the darker your skin is? Not to say, white people can't be poor, but if we're talking about majority here, that statistic tends to be true. And we don't want to talk about that when we talk about racism on a wide scale. And another thing is that in America specifically, I can't speak for other countries, but the poorer a community is, the less education, the less quality education we get. And I can talk all day about education and things that are wrong in the system, but I think that is so unfair to be that the income of your parents dictates how much knowledge you receive and the quality of knowledge that you receive. Not everything that we learn in, privileged, white schools is going to be the same, not what Billy from Ohio learns in school is not going to be the same thing that, Deshaun from Chicago. Like, you can't really compare two people's lives and saying that these people are making excuses, these underprivileged people are making excuses, when they're not even getting proper education. And I really feel like education is the core, like, of everything. You've all probably heard the saying, knowledge is power, and it really is. Honestly, like, in general, human beings, our knowledge is kind of like, it's our biggest strength, and it's also our biggest fault. Like, we're too smart. That's our problem as people. And since knowledge is our power, if you don't have the proper knowledge, how do you expect to learn anything different? Or if you're always have been raised in, like the projects, or, an underprivileged community where there's, drug dealing, shootings, when that's just your environment, how can you tell someone like that they're making excuses about, living a better life, or that they're just always playing the victim, when this institutionalized racism is just so significant? They've just always, why does someone income, just in America, income inequality is a huge issue, and it's just like, I don't understand why someone's income just determines their success in life, and they try to make it seem like it's the underdog's problem because they don't have money. That's America, and it's just so wrong, and it's so messed up on so many levels. And I say all that to sort of tie back in to talking about white privilege and the prison system. The education, I think, also goes back for, the prison system, with why is there more black people in prison than there is in the United States? Like, why is there a higher percentage of black people in prison than in the US? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, that it's not just like all black people are criminals, because not all white people are criminals, and not all white people are innocent, It's just, it doesn't make, it all comes down to education. Like, to me, this just makes so much sense, and I just don't get how some people don't get it. Like, if you taught someone something different, and if they, had a different, I guess, leadership, they had different, guidance, lives can be changed. I saw this video, I think it was on BBC News, I'm not sure, but I saw it on YouTube about this guy who's offering counseling, or just not even counseling, it was a support group in this really rough neighborhood in Baltimore, Maryland. And instead of having, these kids, these young black men and black women resort to fighting in anger, they're talking about support groups. And also, another thing about, money is not all people that, there was just this normal dude who was doing the support group, but not all people, if you don't make a lot of money, can afford, a therapist, or, a more expensive way of resolving your problems. So, I don't know if this is really making sense, but this dude, just the normal dude, saw the importance of, supporting one another and coming together, and tried to do this for the young world. And I think that was so inspiring, that he was just a normal person just doing the support group, because he didn't want to see other black people have these shootings, and they didn't want to see, as much violence in his neighborhood, and he decided to do something. And that is so powerful, and that's what we need more of. Like, just honestly, these little things of just educating these people who need it, providing education, I swear, would make this whole privilege thing with, why do the dominant race get better XYZ when the minorities are kind of just left on the down low, they're just left out. I feel like if we just educated people, both the rich and the poor, if we educated both sides of the spectrum, we would be able to be just as powerful and that racism wouldn't be as prevalent, because racism is taught. It really is. My brother recently had a son, and when you're a baby, like, you don't see like your parents or your friends or the people around you as black or white or Asian or etc. Like, you see them as mom, dad, auntie, uncle. Like, you don't, friend. You don't see race. You're taught to see race. And when you're taught to see race, you're taught stereotypes, which just ultimately aren't true. And it's just a lot. Like, we're taught the racism, and it's institutionalized in America. Yeah. I think I'm actually going to take a quick break. That was a pretty heavy conversation. I'm going to sort of process my thoughts, see what else I want to talk about, and we'll continue this conversation on privilege in just a bit. Hey guys, so I had an idea of what I could do during these breaks. I really wanted to shout out something or someone that I've really been enjoying or just admiring lately. So it's not just all self-promotion, because I figured if you guys care, you'd find me in other places. And I kind of wanted to sort of recap some things I've really been enjoying this month. So, I really have been loving bullet journaling. This month, I started a bullet journal, for the first time, my first legit bullet journal. I just have a title page and then one spread, but it looks really pretty. They're really fun to do. And the spread that I made this month for the month of June was an accomplishment spread. So every day of the year, or every day of the month, why do I keep saying year? Every day of the month, I wrote down something that I accomplished that day. But I've been really loving bullet journaling. It's a lot of fun. The spreads, the fun, colorful spreads, are so much fun to make. I has Cupquake. She recently started posting speed arts of her making her bullet journal spreads. And hers are really good and really pretty and colorful. She's an artist, so she went to college for illustration. So that's her niche, but even if you're not super good at art, I'm not really good at drawing, but I made this spread and it's just all colorful and it's making me so happy to look at it every day. So bullet journaling is the move. I will be making one for July. I actually have to start on that. And I'm excited. Some of the other spreads I'm wanting to make is a hair care spread, so I can keep track of my hair care. A gratitude spread, so I can also keep track of something I'm grateful for every day. So those are just some ideas. You guys should all start bullet journaling. I'm excited. It's a cool way just to track your habits and things you want to keep up. So yeah, Pinterest Mackenzie signing out. Bye, girly pops. Okay, I hate myself. All right, welcome back from the break. I have run out of lemonade and water, so let's hope I don't, start dying, as I wrap up this podcast. But I bought these. What are they? Italian waffle cookies in vanilla flavor, and they're really good, and I've been snacking on them. Anyways, I need to not keep food in my bedroom because that's just really dangerous. I just eat and just have no self-control. But anyways, getting back to privilege, there's a couple more things I thought of that I sort of wanted to finalize. My thoughts on institutionalized racism, something that a lot of people just don't understand. And this goes back to, the idea that black people are always trying to play the victim in situations. But the reality is you can't really play the victim if it's real, if this happens all the time. And not trying to, excuse unlawful behavior or, people that are actually breaking the law and, are doing criminal things against the law. But the way the majority race and the way the majority population looks at Black people and minorities have always been different. And that's just a fact. Whether you think it or you don't, whether it's just a subconscious way that we think and that people think, and it's not good. So I think it's good just to hear from different perspectives and to actually, even if, you are white or, of any other race, to not, be like these people who are making these racist judgments. It's just good to hear people out. Just to not do so much talking and to do more listening. Honestly, that's how we come to understand each other. Even if you can't understand, try to think about it in a place where if you were that Black person getting shot, where you had loved ones and you had a family and friends and people who cared about you, but because the way you looked threatening, quote unquote, and your life is now taken from all those people that care about you because of the way you look. So, I don't know, just sort of think about it from that perspective next time you hear something in the news. Instead of, brushing over it if you aren't Black and or XYZ and you can't relate for whatever reason, try to think about it when you're talking about you. Because everything is different. Everything you hear about the news, tragic events, are different when you're talking about you or the people that you care about. So just some food for thought. I'm definitely subject to sort of just brush some of these headlines of these tragic things that happened under the rug, but it's really important that we don't ignore them, because the way we work to finding a solution is by having conversation and having dialogue and talking about the real issues here. And one of which that I've been really passionate about recently is this institutionalized racism. And a couple examples, if you don't understand what I'm saying, is people, a lot of the times when they look at Black people, they feel like they're threatening for some reason because of, I don't even know. I can't really say why. I guess, I don't know. I'm Black. Who knows? But a couple of real life examples that have happened in the news, or not necessarily recently, but a while ago, I heard about a situation where in Victoria's Secret, a Black woman, I guess, stole something earlier in the day, and then an employee called the police because she saw another Black woman in the store shopping, and she had thought that maybe they were together in the theft, or maybe that they were associated in some way, maybe that she was going to steal something. I don't know if she called the police. I think she called the manager or something. And this woman who was talking about her experience, she was the one that was the victim of this whole situation. She was later, crying in her car because she was just so frustrated of how people made these judgments when they don't even know her. This employee didn't even know this woman. She just saw that they were both Black, and so they must be doing some sort of robbery together. That's just one example. I'll insert some clips if I can find them. I'll look for them for you guys.
Completely furious. I could literally cry. I'm in Victoria's Secret in the Oxford Mall. It was another Black female in here. Got caught stealing, right? So she asks me and another Black female to leave because she can't tell us why, but we kicked out the store because she still can't tell me why. But because another Black female gets caught stealing, me and the other Black female here, we have to be affiliated. So we're all put out.
But another more recent one is the one in the Philadelphia Starbucks, the one that happened in Pennsylvania. Or was it Philadelphia? I know it was Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if it was in that city. But anyways, but you guys have already probably heard it. These two Black guys, they were going to meet someone about in Starbucks about real estate or something. And while these Black dudes were waiting for this white guy who was gonna, talk to them, one of them went up to go to the bathroom. The lady behind the counter wouldn't give him the key. to go to the bathroom because she said that they had to buy something, but that's never been Starbucks' policy, that you have to buy something to use the restroom. And then, another white lady went in earlier and she didn't buy anything and she was allowed to use the bathroom and she was given the key. So it was a whole situation in the news about that. And then the lady ended up calling the police on these two black guys who weren't doing anything because they were asking for the key and they wouldn't give him the key, and she felt threatened or like they were invading the property or some reason. But you guys have heard of the story. If you haven't, Philadelphia Starbucks woman, look that up. And that's another thing about, racial profiling. That's just so prominent in the institutionalized racism that's in this country. And then another example is, of course, Trayvon Martin, who began the Black Lives Matter movement. His death when he was literally walking home. He was 17 years old, walking home, and got shot because he looked like he was threatening or was about to, cause something by like a neighbor or something. And that trial, I don't even know what happened to the neighbor. Was the neighbor even locked up? Because wasn't he charged on like self-defense or something? I think he was put on something for like self-defense, I'm pretty sure. Let me actually look this up. Alright, I looked it up, and so the man he was on neighborhood watch of this neighborhood when Trayvon was walking home or walking somewhere. And he was found, he claimed that, this guy, when he called, 911, he claimed that this guy, Trayvon, looked like a drug dealer or he was up to no good or something. And, he, started following him. And Trayvon, noticed that this guy was following him, so he put his hood up. And I guess shortly between that time, he started firing gunshots, and he said it was for self-defense. I also thought I'd mention that in between the time Trayvon was walking and when he got shot, he ended up punching the neighborhood watch guy who was, following him because he didn't feel comfortable, but he wasn't armed. So he started punching the guy, and neighborhood watch shot him in self-defense. And because of this law we have in America, who knows, I don't know when it was passed, but it's called the Stay in Your Ground law. Basically, it means that it allows you to use deadly force when you feel threatened. And so Zimmerman was later in court found not guilty because it was apparently self-defense, even though Trayvon Martin was doing nothing and, he was just shot for no reason. So, that's America for you. Those are crazy people for you. Obviously not all of America is like this, but it happens too often, and it's such a prevalent thing. So those are just a couple examples of, how black people in particular, are just viewed in media, and just how the white privilege is prevalent in those ways regarding institutionalized racism in this country. And I can talk about this forever, honestly, because it's something that's just, I'm so passionate about, and that people just don't understand. A lot of times, just majority people, which in America is white people, just a lot of times don't understand, but not even just white people, but just people in general don't get. And so I wanted to talk about it. I hope that you understood something. I'm not trying to point fingers or anything. People tend to get their panties in a twist when I talk about race, and I just say blatantly white people, black people, etc. But sometimes you just gotta be real like that just to get your point across and to have people see it through your lens. So the next time you see something like that in the news, or you hear about someone talking about, the racism in America, try to put that in your shoes. Try to put you in the shoes of the guy who got shot, or the mother, per se, of the one who got shot, or something like that. And maybe it'll make you think differently, because when you're talking about you and someone you care about, your perspective changes like, it takes a 180. So, yeah, just some food for thought. I wanted to talk about that, and I hope it was helpful in some way or another. So, another thing I wanted to talk about is the idea of black privilege. So this is a phrase you may or may not be familiar with, but the first time I really thought about this idea was watching The Breakfast Club. I really like that podcast / radio station. I listen to it as a podcast more often than, I don't listen to radio. Anyways, but this is, one of the hosts of The Breakfast Club is Charlemagne the God, and he wrote a book called Black Privilege, and then in colon, it's like the opportunity hold on, let me look this up. Or did I already have this pulled up? I'm pretty sure I already had this pulled up. What is it? Black Privilege. Charlemagne. Okay, Black Privilege, opportunity comes to those who create it. So when he was talking about, I was watching this interview with CNN on his book, Black Privilege, and he said something really interesting, which I'll insert that clip here.
People see black privilege and they automatically think white privilege, which is something that is very prevalent, and black people don't have no privilege, and you're making white people feel like we're equal, and what I'm simply trying to tell people is I think it's a privilege to be black. I think when you look at the word privilege, it has two definitions. One definition is advantages granted to a certain community, but the other definition is an honor to be. And I think it's an honor to be in this black skin. I don't think that my black skin is a liability. I don't think it's a burden. And I just feel like we have access to a divine system that causes us that we can tap into, that causes us to prosper in spite of everything that's thrown at us in this country. So for me, I'm just trying to restore that feeling of like black pride, black excellence, black power.
He basically says, an honor to be and an advantage over others. Those are the two ways he defines black privilege, or just privilege in general, what that means. So I talked about the first bit, I wrote it in the wrong order. I talked about privilege as in an advantage over others when I talked about racism and institutionalized racism. But when Charlemagne was talking about black privilege, he saw it in those both lenses. So he saw it in, first of all, being an honor. So an honor to be black in his instance. And then I'm not sure what he meant by and also having an advantage over others. I actually haven't read the book, so I'm interested in what he had to say about that. I would not mind checking that out. But I really liked the way he phrased that, of how privilege can mean it has two meanings. And a lot of times we just think of the advantage over others, and we think of it as in a negative sense. But like, he thought of it as like a privilege to be black, and that like the black skin, he said, like, I'll insert the clip here also, but he was talking about how being in this black skin is not a burden or a liability. Like, I feel like it's a privilege to, he speaks of it as in he's proud to be black and in a black power sort of way. And I love that. And I think that's really beautiful, the way he talks about privilege in that manner. And I really respect Charlemagne. He is very vocal person, and I don't know, I kind of like that about him. He just doesn't really filter himself, and I think we need more real things in the world. We need more people who just aren't afraid to speak their mind, because a lot of the times we just hold things back, and that's how a lot of like shadiness starts, a lot of drama starts. Because I feel like one of the worst things is when someone's thinking something but they don't say nothing, and then over saying something that may be kind of shady and offensive now, but they're keeping it real. Like, in the end, you can't really be mad at someone who's just honest. So, I don't know. I really feel like we need more people that are honest and authentic and truly themselves. And I, have definitely faulted to this, where like, I'll be thinking something, but I'm like, I don't want to offend someone, so I don't say it. But we know, because a lot of the times you're not the only one thinking this thing. Just no one wants to say it. So I'm trying to learn that and trying to be more vocal, I guess, more authentic, more real. That's one of the reasons I actually created this podcast, is because I wanted a place where I could just say what I was thinking and be proud of what you think. That's another thing. A lot of times people try to make us feel ashamed for having your own opinions. You should be proud of having your own opinions, because a lot of people don't try to form opinions. And I really feel like you can't really be vocal or complain about something if you don't educate yourself first and create an opinion. Like, if you're not even in the conversation, I don't really feel like you have a right to complain. So make yourself a part of the conversation, form an opinion, be a part of the conversation, because your opinion is very important. And yeah, so Black privilege. It's a privilege to be Black. I really can't speak more about the book because I don't know what the book is about. I don't know what he says about being Black is an advantage over others. I don't know how he implies that, but I would be very interested. So I'm gonna check that out. Honestly, because I only really see, because when I think of privilege, I honestly think of like the racism part and like the white privilege part. So I'm curious. I'm curious to know. I should probably look into that. But another type of privilege, and this is I think what I'm gonna wrap it up on, but is male privilege. We've all heard of the Me Too movement of, sexual harassment in the entertainment industry. And honestly, this is one of those things that makes me more afraid, not just in the industry, because I want to enter the media industry and the digital space, but also just in life in general. When you become more independent as you age, you have to learn how to be affirmative and strong in yourself, in who you are at the core of yourself. You have to learn how to be assured of yourself and how to say no to things you don't want to do, how to stand up for yourself when you feel like you're being treated wrong. And a lot of times I feel like this is oftentimes like shaked, like this, our like assurance in ourself can be moved, I guess, by people in power, which a lot of the times, unfortunately, is men. And not to say that this always happens. I'm not saying that all, men are in power, but there's a lot more male CEOs and etc. in power than there are women, unfortunately. And also minority groups, unfortunately. And we're working towards that. We're doing a really great job, not to discredit, the work that these, amazing women entrepreneurs and CEOs are doing, because y'all are amazing. But, when we live in a world where it's like a male-dominated world, sometimes you want to say something or do something to get a job or to, make money. And I know that sounds really sad, and it doesn't have to be a sexual thing or anything, but to sacrifice, I guess, some part of your personality or something of yourself to make money or to, be employed. And I can't really speak on specific examples because I'm not in the workforce, but I know it happens, and that just makes me just so sad. I never want to have to trade who I am as a person for a job. I never want to have to, I'd never want my self-assurance to be shaken by someone in power. It's just so sad that we're in a place where speaking truth to power is a sacrifice. And that's not okay. I was listening to a TED Talk by Lovey Ajayi. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. She's a writer, she's a blogger, a speaker. She's great. But listening to a TED Talk, and she was talking about speaking truth to power. So I'll insert a clip here.
And I feel like every day that I'm speaking truth against institutions and people who are bigger than me and just forces that are more powerful than me, I feel like I'm falling out of that plane. but I realized comfort is overrated because being quiet is comfortable. Keeping things the way they've been is comfortable. And all comfort has done is maintain the status quo. So we've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable by speaking these hard truths when they're necessary. People are so afraid of these acute consequences, not realizing that there are many times when we walk in rooms and we are some of the most powerful people in those rooms. We might be the second most powerful, third most powerful. And I firmly believe that our job in those times is to disrupt what is happening. People and systems count on our silence to keep us exactly where we are. Telling the truth, telling thoughtful truth should not be a revolutionary act. Speaking truth to power should not be sacrificial, but they are. But I think if more of us chose to do this for the greater good, we'd be in better spaces than we are right now.
I love the way she talks about speaking truth to power and how your silence serves no one. And that it shouldn't be a sacrifice, but you should feel empowered that you're speaking your truth, especially, when it's hard, and especially when there's some sort of obstacle. Like, that's when you really need to speak your truth the most. Is to show that you're not going to be silenced and you're not going to take mistreatment, because you're worth more than that. So, and that just goes, and those examples specifically are talking about the work industry, but also in life. Like, male privilege men, I feel like, don't necessarily always realize the privilege that they do have. Whether you're a man that's not in power, if you're, I don't know, if you're like I think in my particular situation, a lot of the times I have trouble, even if it's like a cousin or like a sibling. Sometimes for me particularly, I'm afraid to say, like, to have my own opinion when someone makes their voice like so prominent and so heard. With my brothers, or maybe just other men in my family, when they have an opinion, it's harder for me to say something to express my opinion, because they're always a rebuttal that makes them, I guess, more powerful. And I feel like that has to do with the stigma that, like, women just sort of just should just be submissive to men. I don't want to say, I really don't like these, like, the words that I'm using. I just, for lack of a better word, it kind of, feel like, feeds into that ideal. And it's not necessarily just with men that I feel this way. I've just always been just like a quiet person that's afraid to, put myself out there and to share my opinions. But I've been thinking recently how important it is to start on these smaller levels before I get into the real workforce. If I can't even say an opinion to my brother without, being like shut down by what he says, like, what am I going to do when I get a job? And that's something I've been really trying to, like, deal with lately. And it's hard, because it's not just with men in general, it's just with people in general. But for me, I feel much more comfortable confronting a woman than I do a man. And I don't know why that is. Like, I feel like it's one of those psychological things that you're sort of just taught. And yeah, and that's not necessarily fair or right, but I feel like it's definitely influenced my life and a lot of people's lives, and I'm just trying to work through that and learn through that right now. So that's male privilege for you. And there's one more thing I actually thought of. There's this talk show I really love to watch, The Real Daytime, on Fox News, or just Fox, and they were talking recently about they had a segment on their YouTube channel where they talked about, is your name costing you job opportunities? And it talks about, which this is really prevalent, I think Adrian on the show called this resume whitening, where basically the more white or the more European your name sound, the more likely you were to get a job in America. And unfortunately, that happens all the time. If you're going to if your name is Joe Smith compared to, like, Shanika Brown. Like, which one? Like, it's so sad to think that people in power are going to choose the Joe Smith, like, over the Shanika, and they could have the same credentials. Shanika could even be more qualified for the position and have, more experience than needed, but then Joe Smith would still get the job. And it's hard to, it drives me crazy how to think that people are going to judge you by your name. And that's what this whole segment is about. But unfortunately, it happens all the time. And not just with, a white and black thing, but Adrienne on the show, she is Latina, and she was saying how when she signed up for like Latina roles, a lot of the times she couldn't get the role because she didn't have a traditional Latin sounding last name. Before she got married, her name was Adrienne Bailon. She was a Cheetah Girl on Disney and stuff like that. But, she was saying when she went on auditions, because her name wasn't like Hernandez, Perez, Lopez, Rivera, things like that she couldn't get a job as a Latina because they didn't see her name as being qualified, which that is so ridiculous. And I just hate how people in power think like this. Obviously, this is not all people in power. We have amazing, new leaders that are, doing great things with their companies, and their, light and their work should speak for themselves and shape the rest of us. But way too many big industries do, including the entertainment industry, which is what I want to go into. And that just really sucks to think about how, like, things that I can't control about myself are affecting my employment. And that is just so wrong. And I just wish that more people in power would not think that way. But anyways, that was a heavy conversation, but I really did enjoy this podcast. If you guys have any feedback, let me know. You can send me an email. It's in the show notes, description, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to make a super long outro because I've been doing that a lot recently. So I will see you guys in the next episode. Also, excuse if you heard anything in the background. I usually don't record episodes in the middle of the day, but I did today for some reason. All right. Bye, you guys. Thanks for tuning in.